related to a major issue of public policy. So I hope that addressed that question. My hope is that as we go back into the slides, what you're seeing are structures that you are starting to recognize. And depending on the topic, you're starting to get a feel for, well, who are these important people? What are they talking about? What are the factions or the divisions among them that might express differences of opinion and orientation or even political commitments? So there are lots of different ways of drawing social media. This is one way of looking at Twitter as a chain of messages and replies. And when we look at it this way, it helps us answer the question, if social media was either moss or maples, if it was like a grassland or a forest, which one is it more like, moss or maples? And from this, I see moss. Most things don't grow very high, and only a very few grow tall. In this case, perhaps we could look at this as rooting rather than branching to the sky. This is rooting into the ground. If you want, you can flip it over either way. But what you're seeing is the fact that most messages never get a reply, and those that do get a reply typically only get one, and of those that get a few, usually everything dies out within a generation or two of reply and reply and reply. And it is very rare to get a long chain of replies, and it's very rare to have a group of people all reply to a single message. And this is all visible in a visualization of the ways in which turns and replies take place. And again, we're beginning to visually inspect and test that claim inherent in the name social media, just how social is social media. So our aspiration is that we are setting up a kind of array, a global set of scholars, each able to take the tool and point it at a phenomenon of interest in themselves, in the languages that matter to them, with the local subject matter expertise that only they have. And that what would come from that is, we hope, and actually are pleased to announce have, a lot of publication. And you can check out a lot of these publications at Google Scholar. Here's Google Scholar for the word NodeXL. And we're pleased that let's see, if we go to any time, the number keeps growing. We're now over 9,000 publications. And if you type in some modifier, you often get a narrower set, but of papers that might be much more relevant to the topics that you're interested in. And you might find that there is an almost instant lit review being provided to you. You could type in different topics, and you might find that somebody's already written a paper that you can use as a springboard for the research that you're looking at. A lot of people are concerned with, there you go, alternate realities on social media, Twitter, and the German right wing. So this tool's getting used in a lot of ways. I was just reminded that PubMed.org, maybe .com, but PubMed is the medical database. I think we'll go to .com. And there's a whole bunch of citations to NodeXL there that we never saw in Google Scholar, and apparently we're not going to see.
Hello, Mark, we cannot see your screen.
Oh my goodness! Wait a second. I thought I shared my screen.
Yeah.
I did share my screen.
Sorry.
I shared my screen. Okay, let's try that again. Thank you for that heads up. I appreciate that. So I was trying to direct your attention to this. Okay, let's back up a second. where were we? We were, here we go. So, so you didn't see this. So this is the moss or maples discussion. The threaded chains, you can see many of them are, there's a few of them that are long, most of them are very, very short. And very rarely do you get groups of people to reply to the same message. So I'll just go past that. And then the idea of the tool being used by many people around the world to create a kind of array of sensors to allow us to build a collective map of the structure of social media and to answer questions like, are different national or linguistic populations using social media in the same or different ways? In what way do different nationalities use social media differently? And so we are finding that a lot of scholars are publishing papers, and that these papers can then be found here at, this is scholar.google. And if you type in NodeXL, you'll see that we are now at about 9,230 papers. If we limit it to just 2021, that's 368 year to date, 1,200 or so in the last year and quarter or two. And I was also suggesting that if you add a modifier term in Google Scholar, so not just NodeXL, but NodeXL in Korea, or the word NodeXL and health, or the word NodeXL and disinformation, which we like to spell, you're going to find that there are a lot of papers out there that maybe have covered some of the ground that you're interested in, and that's always good news, not bad news, because you can either replicate or you can model your methodology on their methodology. They got a publication, so it could be a good guide to your publication. And so we are very eager to see this number grow. This is one of the ways that we're keeping score. It's by looking for the publications out there that are citing NodeXL, and a large fraction of them, we believe, would not be possible were it not for NodeXL, because these are probably scholars who are not making the choice between NodeXL and Python. It's just they're not in a position to make use of Python the way that many of us are. So many papers of interest can be found at scholar.google, and the Social Media Research Foundation's goals are to facilitate this, to help scholars get to their data, analyze it, visualize it, write a report about it. And that report is not the actual publication. We're not a paper writing machine, but we are a paper writing facilitation machine. Another way to put it is that this is dissertation in a box. Just add graduate student. The method, the data collection, a lot of that can be now set aside, and instead the focus can be on the topic and the interpretation and the theoretical relevance of the findings. So going to Graph Gallery is one of the first steps. It's a place for you to go to see best practices in network visualization, but also to identify topics of interest that you may actually be able to put to research use just by going to the gallery. You may have a theory about anti-vaxxers or climate denialists, or people who say that COVID is a hoax or that masks cause COVID. You may be interested in topics that have these sudden outbursts of disinformation and propaganda. Who here remembers the word hydroxychloroquine, right? Hydroxychloroquine was supposed to be the miracle cure for COVID, and yet if it was a miracle cure for COVID, wouldn't it be used? And even if one nation politically suppressed for some very peculiar reason a miracle cure for a devastating and expensive disease, would all countries do that? And so, the explosion of HCQ, hydroxychloroquine discussion, really all but drowned out all other discussion of COVID policy during the months of, what was it, April and May of last year. It's kind of interesting to ask the question, where did that come from? Because it didn't come from doctors, right? I mean, here we are a year later. If hydroxychloroquine is the miracle cure, why aren't we all taking it? So if we want to do systematic studies of disinformation, we might actually want to map disinformation. And so these maps help us identify the structures in social media, and all of social media turns out to have these networks. It's not just Twitter. YouTube, wikis, blogs, email, even Facebook, although it's no longer accessible. Every time you do something with somebody else on the net, you're creating a network element, an edge. And every time you do that, you're leaving footprints in the sand. And between APIs and scrapers and databases, a pattern can be collected and discerned. A story can be told. How many people? Which way did they go? Were they alone, in groups? Did they bring animals? Did they bring a wagon? How long ago was this? Because, in 8 or 10 hours, the tide's going to come in and wash it all away. So just a photograph of footprints in the sand is incredibly information rich. And that sand is silicon. And if you convert it into a CPU, it gets even better at this trick. Footprints are left behind in everything that we do in social media. And what we're doing in social media is expressing edges. Almost every click, tap, and swipe authors an edge. You're liking and linking and replying and rating and reviewing and following and friending and favoriting and forwarding. It's a lot of stuff we do with our machines, but every time you do it, you're creating an edge, a connection, a link, a tie. And different platforms generate different kinds of ties, but they all generate ties. And so all of the social media network platforms must be networks. They must generate networks. And so we've done this already a little bit because we created our little group network. But a network is born whenever you can answer what is sometimes referred to as the journalistic question. And this is sometimes referred to as the 5 W's. Who did what, with whom, when, and where. And so when we in our project invite you to think link, what we are hoping for is, instead of a focus on the attributes of A and the attributes of B, how much education does A have? How much income does B have? What zip code is A in? What vehicle did B buy? These are all attributes of the individual. They're perfectly useful data. The internet economy runs on that. But what we're interested in what way is A related to B? How did they connect? And of course, the reciprocal question comes to mind: is B related back? Or is this perhaps a mutual connection where it doesn't make sense to say that it goes from one to the other? There's like, if I live near you, almost by definition, you live near me. But if I lend you money or give you a ride to the airport, that doesn't mean you lent me money, and it doesn't mean that you give me a ride to the airport. And so some of these relationships are mutual and some are not. there is the fact that there's also the imbalance in the relationship, the sense that we can have a mutual tie, but I might call you once a year and you might call me once a week. And so there is an imbalance. And so it is not just the encoding of the edge, it is also the encoding of the weight, the strength, the value of the edge. And again, in some cases, the edge may be a mutual relationship, but it could also have an attribute like duration. So, well, sociologists have studied this. If you find that you are married to someone who is not married to you, we recommend counseling. But you could say that a marriage has a duration. Sometimes it has an end point, but hopefully not. And so the question is this a one direction? Is it two directional? Does it have a magnitude? And so we can encode this. We did encode this, a simple version of this, simply by writing people's names next to each other in two columns. And we even bumped into some good quality errors in that I spelled Park Han-woo's name wrong. I added a space to it in one case and not in another. And that's a no-no. Don't do that. Don't do that. Everybody has to have a GUID, G-U-I-D. A GUID is a globally unique identifier. And so whenever you can get two GUIDs on the same row in a spreadsheet, you have created an edge. And so this could be phone number one, phone number two, time of the call, duration of the call, maybe the date that which mobile provider person one was on, which mobile provider person two was on. That could be a phone call. Could be bank account one, bank account two, the date of the transaction, the amount of the transaction, whether or not the person was in the same bank, how long they've had an account. That would be bank transaction. Email, the sender, the receiver. A tweet would be the first person's name and then who they retweeted or replied to. There is a small infinity of relationship types, all the different ways that things can connect to other things. And all of them would just be a label stuck in the edge attribute, the how are these things connected to each other column. And so whenever you can express the answer to the question, who did what with whom, when and where, and you can get it into this format, you have an edge list. And if you have an edge list, you have a network. And if you have a network and NodeXL, you are going to get a report, a visualization, and then ultimately an interactive web business intelligence data visualization interface, something that you could share with colleagues or perhaps use yourself to engage in the next phases of analysis, which we've identified as discovery and presentation. So if the first 5 things that we were trying to facilitate were collection, storage, analysis, visualization, and reporting, we now see that there are 2 more. And that is the identification or the discovery of the insight, and then showing the insight to somebody else. And so when we give it to you, give this data to you in the form of a spreadsheet, it is often not yet quite digestible. It's almost there, but I'm going to show you what we do with it next. So the journalistic questions, who did what with whom, when, and where, if we can answer those questions with your data, perhaps like Diane Klein, you did this manually by reading newspaper articles, or maybe you're reading novels or ancient historical records, or perhaps you're just importing data from Wikipedia or from Twitter or from YouTube. Either way, the way that we represent a network is this way, by showing vertex 1 and vertex 2, how they're connected, and then the attributes of vertex 1 and vertex 2. And when we get that, we're going to get to what the Pew report tells us. It's going to reveal that there are these structural patterns in our data, and we're going to want to ask questions like, which one are we? For any given hashtag, what type of hashtag are we? For any given topic in social media, is it polarized? Does it have a broadcast? Who is the thought leader at the center of that broadcast? And so we do direct people towards the Pew Research Internet Project report, where it brings you through the appreciation of these structures like hubs that really recognize or represent the presence of these things, audiences. And again, there's nothing wrong with an audience. It's just that an audience is not a community. And if we were going to take the name of the phenomena at face value, we might be misled. It says it's about online community, but it's rare to find it. It says it's about social interactions and social media, but it's rare to find it. We talked about the two polarized clusters. In some cases, there are bridges, those rare people who connect otherwise separate and distinct clusters. So when we look in our data, we're going to look for bridges, especially if part of our goal is to actually create a unification of otherwise divided clusters. That might be one of our goals. Of course, one of our other goals might be to divide clusters, in which case we kind of want to blow up a bridge. But bridges are also interesting structures in the data. And this is my bridge in San Francisco. That's the Golden Gate Bridge. Come visit our bridge. I know you have some nice bridges, but we have a nice bridge. And then, of course, we talked about the isolates, the islands, the people with zero connection. And in isolation, each individual isolate is not terribly important. This is somebody who said something once and no one replied to them, and they replied to no one. But sociologically, they become much more important when there are many of them, when it is not an island, but an archipelago of islands. That means something. It means the presence of the brand pattern. It means that people can mention a topic without having to reply to mention it or to repeat somebody else's mention of it. And so again, the structure of having no structure is a structure. Having zero connections is a pattern. And so we are looking for how much of the population has this zero connection property. And as you've seen from the graph gallery, sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's none. And the presence or absence of this archipelago is an indicator of the publicness, the visibility of the topic. It's a proxy for it. So what do we want to know? We would like to reach into social media and be able to get a scoop of it and pour it into like the juicing machine. Perhaps it's the espresso machine, pull a shot and knock back some essence of this collection of connections. And again, we're looking for the shape and the structure. We're also looking for these key moments where something big happened, something maybe that a story can be told about. Okay, so there are already tools that attempt to analyze social media, and you may already be familiar with tools like Brand Watch, Melt Water, Talk Walker, Sprout Social, what's the Marketing Cloud. So there's a few of them out there, but for the most part, they engage in content analysis. They are going to count the frequency of words, the frequency with which people are retweeted or replied to, but they're not going to calculate a network. And I guess I'm here to argue you shouldn't not calculate a network. You should calculate a network. You should always calculate a network because things are connected to things, and the pattern that they find themselves in is information. It's often better information than the information you have about the thing itself. You have information about how it's connected to other things. And from that, you often are able to identify things like the group it belongs in or its role in that group. Is it the leader? Is it a follower? Where does it sit within the graph? So most approaches to social media start here at content. And we start 2 layers above it at connection. And by that, I mean, we see a tweet as more than just a message, because we see a tweet as actually encoding information about who connects to who. So I think I can illustrate that right here. There we go. So a tweet is not just a tweet. It's not just a collection of words. A tweet encodes who is replying to or mentioning or retweeting who, and where the name in the tweet is positioned tells us something about the role that person plays, the connection type that has been made between those two entities. And so once we've layered in all the different ways people can connect to people, suddenly a new picture emerges. It's not just words, it's now connections. And from connections, we form clusters. And clusters are essentially the meso layer. We have a micro, we have an individual, we have a macro, it's the collection of all tweets, but now we've gained this meso layer, the cluster. And it's in this cluster that we can do content analysis and have that content analysis not prejudged by the content itself. So you're not telling a group of people to be in a bucket because they used a word. You're saying that they form a bucket because they said each other's names in a way. And then we're looking at the words they use. So connection leads to cluster, cluster leads to content. But beyond the content, we're now in possession of this structural data, and that tells us something about the shape of the crowd. What kind of discussion is this? Does it have a brand? Does it have a broadcast? Does it have a community? And who are the leaders? And of course, the goal is ultimately changing things. Observation is useful, but usually observation is performed in order to engage in targeting. We would like to change social media in some meaningful way, and we have very good reason for wanting to do so, rather than creating a kind of digital utopia. We got something a little different, didn't we? We were granted something a little unexpected. So I'll show you some of the work of a colleague of mine, Wasim Ahmed at Newcastle, University of Newcastle in England. His work focused on how 5G cell towers were targeted by people concerned with COVID because they believe that 5G cell towers caused COVID. And that's a confusing belief, but we're dealing with an environment in which things like anti-vax exist. And so low quality information is a thing. And we have now better tools to actually look at people talking about COVID and 5G, to be able to identify what turns out to be a relatively small group of people who promote these ideas. And so there's a kind of blessing and a curse quality to this, in that it is only a relatively small group of people. That's a blessing. Maybe we could do something about it. If it was millions, it would be harder. But it's also a curse in the sense that only a small group of people can have outside it, or even a small group of people can have an outsized impact by spreading disinformation through social media. Social media is an amplifier, but it is not a selective amplifier. It will amplify misinformation and disinformation and propaganda as much as it will factual information, valid information. And so what we are looking for are tools that will enable the scholar to become a kind of auditor, an accountant of what is sometimes referred to as the marketplace of ideas. And I wonder, can I do another interactive moment? Quick show of the hand icon. How many people have heard of the concept or the idea of the marketplace of ideas? Any marketplace of ideas people? So I'm going to take that as not a lot of people familiar with the idea of the marketplace of ideas, which is an interesting point in and of itself. What I find is that there are often a lot more people in America have heard of this idea because Americans love marketplaces. We think everything should be a marketplace. But the marketplace of ideas idea is, hey, there are good ideas, there are bad ideas, but like products, like cars, eventually the bad cars, people hear about the bad cars and they don't buy them anymore. And therefore, there's pressure in the market to make good cars. And therefore, you don't have to worry about quality of ideas. Ideas will just get better on their own. So that's an idea about ideas. And you know what? I think it's probably a bad idea because QAnon, anti-vax, COVID denial, and vaccine hesitance, there's a lot of ideas out there. They're very bad ideas. And so we might want to have a tool that would be capable of evaluating large volumes of this content so that we could figure out how do these really low quality ideas spread and who are those spreaders. And so again, there are 5 basic tasks that we think need to be done in order to perform the function of being a citizen of the network society. You have to be able to get a network. How can you be a network scholar if you don't get a network? You have to store it and analyze it. You have to visualize it. You have to generate a report. And so what we found is that there's 2 extra categories on the end of this slide that we didn't know about at first. And that is, then you engage in discovery and then you engage in presentation. And I'm going to show you how we've enabled that very soon. So just again, to highlight that idea, the micro, the meso, the macro, there is a person or a user or an account down at the bottom. But they sit within one or another cluster. And that cluster also has a kind of methodological validity. These people are more connected to each other than to the rest of the graph. And then there is the graph as a whole, the all. And the all is interesting. It's just also interesting to note that the part is not just a small version of the all. The parts are different from the all. So once we have the tools to step back and see and then zoom down and interrogate a network, what can we start to do? Well, we're going to be able to find the most important people. And we're going to find the most important people not because they have a lot of followers. We're going to find them because of the position they occupy in the network. And so here you'll see a very basic, completely fabricated artificial network. But I'm going to try to use this network to illustrate 2 of the ways that we count node level metrics in network theory. There are more. I'll leave the slides in. You can look at them later. But first, I'll just start with degree. So let's go back. They're all the same, but now we're going to make them bigger and redder if they have this thing called degree. And degree is how many lines touch you. And so here is K, here is I. How many lines touch them? One each. They're very small. They're the same size as B, C, D, E, and so on. But look at A and Z, even O. Big dot. O's got 1, 2, 3, 4 lines touching it. So O here, degree of 4. But that's not the only way to count. We could count other things, not just the lines that touch you, but what if we count how much will the graph break into separate pieces if we remove you? So this is now a question about what happens to the network if we remove a node. And keep your eyes on O here. And notice that O just got small and F got bigger. O has the same number of connections. F has fewer connections. F is big, O is small. What's going on? Let's get an explanation. If you remove F, what happens to the network? We're going to have 3 networks. We're going to have this Y-shaped tail break away, the starfish floats away, and then this big complex is off on its own. This is a keystone. This is a linchpin. This is the glue that holds the network together. Here's more glue, Q. But why is O suddenly not glue? O has 4 connections. Why is O not high in betweenness? And so to illustrate this, let's think about L, and L wants to talk to N. And if you don't have direct connection, you can't talk to somebody. So you have to find somebody to carry your message. And one day, L, who has routinely gone to O to send a message to N, finds that O is just not in the network anymore. O is gone. What will L do? Well, talk to P, talk to M. L's got alternatives. O did not have a monopoly. F does. F has a monopoly. If A wants to talk to L and F leaves, we're done. If A wants to talk to G and F leaves, we're done. Now we're assuming that they can't form new relationships. We'll just hold that as an assumption for a moment. But we are now counting the how unique is your connection? How distinctly connected across the network are you in a way that nobody else connects like you? And that's what we're going to call betweenness centrality. And it's different than closeness, and it's different from eigenvector, and there's also page rank, and there's clustering coefficient. And these are all just different ways of measuring the where am I in my network. It's essentially network latitude and longitude. And we're going to use this one, betweenness, to indicate, are you my mayor? Are you the influencer in my network? We're going to use this as a better indicator, a better proxy than, let's say, follower count, tweet count, retweet count, reply count. All of those things won't matter, we'll see, as compared to where the person sits within that network. And so we're going to try to automate this flow, and now we're adding 2 more boxes on the end, discovery and presentation. And so the function of the pipeline is to get you to some data, and we'll do that through the import menu. But then the task is to put it somewhere. Where are you going to put your network? And for us, the answer is Excel. And then you need to calculate something about this. We have to do the data analysis. We have to calculate the degree and the in degree and the out degree and the betweenness and the closeness and the eigenvector and the page rank, all of those basic network metrics, and NodeXL will happily calculate all of them for you. And then we're moving towards the ultimate purpose of this effort, and that is to communicate insight into connected structures. And so generating an automated visualization is a really important part of this. But then putting the visualization somewhere that other people can get to them, equally important. And then, as I've been promising, we're going to get to it, the process of discovery and presentation. So when you make these maps, you get to know certain things quickly that would otherwise take a long time to get to know. And that means that you can continue to know those things on a day-to-day basis, and you can know them for more topics than a human should be able to follow. If you care about 10 topics and they each generate 5,000 tweets a day, then you have 50,000 tweets a day that you are sort of behind on. And wouldn't it be nice instead to have, 10 one-minute reports to read? And so when people get these tools, they're suddenly able to get some good research results out there. And as we've seen in Google Scholar, there is an opportunity to really say meaningful things about a collection of connections. And so I see a question here, does it mean that a network analysis must include all of these to be complete? Or is it okay to look at just a few? Or do the results altogether make the picture for interpretation of what the network structure is like? Well, that's a really good question. Let me put it this way. It probably is relatively inexpensive to let NodeXL do a full analysis. Having said that, in photography, having developed color photography, it is still the case that people use black and white, and for good reason, not just that aesthetic film noir thing. I was just watching videos that describe how the Mars lander and rover takes pictures of the world. And it turns out that it uses a black and white camera, and it rotates color filters on front of it, because it turns out that that's a higher quality scientific grade instrument than a color camera, which basically has 3 little tiny dots of different colors. And there are good reasons to use black and white at certain times. So even the most minimal analysis is going to tell you something. The more layers you add on, perhaps the better. It really depends on the analytic purpose and goal. If the goal is simply find me the most central person, then we don't need to know what they said. We just need to know who replied to who and who retweeted who. If the goal is to figure out what did the most central person say, now we must also add content analysis. If we want to know when was the most central person most active, we now have to have time series analysis. So it really depends on what is the weight and shape of the analytic claim you would like to rest on this data. And to that end, you will need to have generated various results, because each result is essentially a different dimension of that data. And in fact, I have here brand new, so it's a manual slide. Here we go. This is the relational data structure of a lot of social media. In this case, it's Twitter. But what it's showing is that there are a lot of different dimensions of the data, and then elements of those dimensions. And so a person, oh yeah, I can make this available. A person is a user, but a user has metadata, like what browser are they using, but they also have a location in a network, and they also use some words. And the goal of the Insights tool, which I promised a long time and I'll soon be demonstrating, is to pivot from any dimension to any dimension, to filter using any dimension, and not just any one dimension, but any set of dimensions. So it would be interesting to know, in some collection of annotated connections, how did people who use iPhone compare to people who used Android? And how did people who use one hashtag compare to the people who use some other hashtag? And what about people who were active during the European day, and what about people who are active during the North American night, and so on and so on and so on. And so enough promise, let's go look. This is NodeXL Pro Insights. And NodeXL Pro Insights builds on a Microsoft platform called Power BI. And that stands for Business Intelligence. And Microsoft Power BI is a lot like something called Tableau. So perhaps the group has heard of Tableau. It's now a platform owned by Salesforce that makes it pretty easy for non-programmers to create a web page that is driven by a database that lets you filter and sort and do a lot of stuff with your data. And that's what we've done here. And I think the link to this page is in the chat, and I'm going to add it here just one more time. And so you can join me here, and you can play with this as well. This is the hashtag MRX, which stands for Market Research Exchange. And what this has done is taken a data set from NodeXL, and it has published it into an interactive data visualization that I hope many of you are accessing through the web. And so it is no longer the case that you would need Excel on a Windows desktop. You now can use an iPad or a MacBook or a Chromebook or an old Windows laptop with the old version of Office that you haven't upgraded. All of those things now can run this. And so this is what would happen if you took your NodeXL output, the workbook, and then you press another button and you publish it into Power BI. And what it does is not just give us a colorful view of what this looks like. It's not just a, here we go. It's not just a view that has a lot of colorful blocks, but it also has some remarkably powerful display and filtering abilities. So for example, here we're going to see a world map, and we can ask the question, all of these people said the hashtag MRX, but some of them are talking about market research, and some of them use the phrase new MR, and I'm just going to click, and we're going to see where the new MR people are. And we're going to see who the people who said new MR are, and who did they even talk to, and who are the most central people, who got the most retweeted, where are they physically located, what did they link to on the web, what kind of client did they use? Are they a Hootsuite's big here, web app, iPhone, HubSpot, TweetDeck, Buffer. I'm looking for Android. Here it is. So now if I hold the control key down and hit and click again, I'm now only seeing the people who said new MR and used an Android. And so this kind of filter gives us new abilities to discover what is the pattern. And how do those patterns vary, maybe from location, or we could say, look, I only want to see the people who use Twitter on the web. I don't want to see anybody else. I only want to see the people who used Android, or perhaps what we really want to know is what is the day of the week and the hour of the day that is the most active. And I think my eye just found that point of the day and the week. So it's 3 p.m. on Friday is when MRX, the hashtag, gets really active. And all time, by the way, is in GMT. So that's 3 p.m. in England on a Friday. And that's when this topic gets active. We can see what time during the hour. It's later during the hour, by the minute, by the second, and again, by all these other attributes. So the goal here is to allow you to pivot and slice and dice your data in a way that it doesn't require that you master certain very difficult features of Excel, like VLOOKUP. It's not that easy to say to Excel, look, people have to say the word new MR, and they also have to have used Hootsuite, and they also should have used one of the negative sentiment words. Just show me those people. Plot them, let me pick through them and find the people who are at the high end of quadrant 2 and identify them and maybe drill into that person. And even drill down into a detailed profile of just that person. And so these kinds of slice and dice features are designed to make the discovery task number 6, now a much easier and enjoyable process. We're almost always looking at quadrant 2, right? We want to know what is it about that tweet that made it able to get that many favorites and that many retweets, and that's the tweet. And who is this author that created this most popular tweet? It got like 2,300 favorites. It was, yeah, this is a very favorited person. And so this may be somebody you really want to pay attention to in a way that you wouldn't pay attention to the next random Twitter user, perhaps a user like this who is very visible because they talk about a lot of people. They have a high out degree, but they have 0 in degree and nobody talks about them. Or at the other end of things, this is a person who is talked about by many, but never says anybody else's name. Whereas these are the people who both are talked about and talk about others. They are the social leaders in this community. And it's a lot easier to just mouse around quadrant number 2 than it is to read through thousands of tweets to try to identify this. And having done so, if you identify it, you come away with that intuition. You know that Women in Research just is one of the leadership accounts. How are you going to communicate that? How are you going to present that insight? Well, you'll end up making a scatter plot maybe, but we would be very honored to make that scatter plot for you. We're going to do this also with content analysis and sentiment. We also do it with hashtags. So we get that nice word cloud kind of hashtag behavior. Then we can do it with the words in use. So now it's not got to have a number sign in front of it. So now it's just any word. And then those words could have valence. There could be happy words and unhappy words, or at least there could be list 1 words and list 2 words. And here we can see which are the happy words, which are the unhappy words. And if you click a word, now we're only seeing the hashtags that go along with it, the domains that were linked to it, and the people who mention it. So Raccoon City, this is the person who mentioned the word tyrant. And if we want to find the person who mentions innovation, we're going to find that it's a very different person. So this is all designed to make that bucket of social media content, comments, replies, mentions. It's a sticky, complex, detailed bucket of data. But I think what we want to be able to extract from it is this sense of what is being talked about in here? Who are these people? And for any given image, who are the people who use it? And with what success? And when we point this at political topics, boy, some of these pictures are not friendly, right? You can easily find opponents, the people who are taking up propagandistic positions in the data. This can also be done with web links. So what are the URLs and the domains that are being linked to, and what actual URLs are being linked to that domain most frequently with this little drill down. So the goal for us is to facilitate your exploration of the data, to engage in that discovery, and then to potentially have a story to tell to other people, maybe a story that you could tell with just a few clicks. Like, in what way is group one the same or different from group two? And by clicking, and then I will note that this is the pro tip, you have to hold the control key down to click the second time, otherwise it replaces the click. So if you want to add a click, you hold control and click again. And so now we are comparing the people in group one with the people in group two. What is the media that they tweet? What words do they use? What hashtags do they use? What do they link to? And even who are the people? And then we could further say, I only want to see the unhappy people in each group, and I'm now control clicking uses a negative word, and we're going to see it filter and filter and filter again. So these are only unhappy people in group two versus group one, and we can see who they are and how they compare. So I'm going to pause for just a moment, see if there are any questions, queries, comments, concerns. No? Okay. Gonna jump back to. All right, there we go. So what you're getting out of these results is a sense of the shape of the crowd. You're going to be able to compare those shapes. You're going to be able to tell who the leaders are in these shapes. The Pew Report's a handy guide to identifying which shape you are. And once you know what shape you are, you may also discover that you would prefer to be a different shape. If you are divided, you might want to be unified. If you are unified, you might want fragmentation, or at least you want to increase some fragmentation, because that's the indication that you have become a brand, and that might be a goal. You might have a community but want to develop the hub and spoke because you want to develop an audience. And so navigating from what you are to what you want to be is almost always a good idea. And so there are different patterns. And as we look at them more closely, you can see just how different these networks are from one another. And there is, of course, the great book. There's the book. And our new co-author, that's Itai Himmelboim. We're now in the second edition. And let me just say the names of my talented and very handsome co-authors. There's Derek Hansen, now at Brigham Young University in their School of Information. And of course, the great Dr. Ben Schneiderman, a professor emeritus at the University of Maryland, co-author and co-founder of the NodeXL project, and a major contributor to the information visualization world. And then that was me about 30 years ago, before I all went gray. So we've talked about the data flow, but yes, so we want you to be able to ask questions like, how do I compare to somebody else? And how could I intervene? How could I try to change what I have to be what I want? And what would where would the levers be? Where would the fulcrum be? How do I cause change? And the answer is going to be to engage the people who already exhibit social power. Those are going to be the mayors. So engage the mayors of a topic is the strategy that social network analysis leads us to. Find the people at the hub and engage them. Because when you do that, what you may find is that if this is you, your initial goal is to have your own audience, and that's not easy, but doable. But what network theory suggests is that what you really also wanted was that your audience would get its own audience. That's a stretch goal. That's a very advanced accomplishment, because when your audience gets its own audience, it adds value to your message. If you say product X from my company is the best product in the world, I don't believe you. But if somebody else says, I use product X, it's the best product in the world, I might believe them a lot more. And so your audience gets an audience is an important phenomenon. People mention you without talking to each other. You've become a brand. That's an aspiration to have. And then there's audience becomes community. They actually talk to each other enough that if you leave, they keep talking. And that's an accomplishment too. So some of these shapes are better than others for some purposes. No one shape is always good. No one shape is always bad. It really depends on what you want it to be. If you wanted to be a brand and you were a tight community, it's failure. If you wanted to be a customer support and you got community, that's also failure. But if you had brand and you wanted community, that would also be a form of failure. And so you might try going down these rows, looking for whatever it is that you already are. And then you might go across the columns looking for what you want to be. And then look for the probability and the action suggested in order to migrate from this pattern to this pattern. And so not all of them are desirable. If they're red, that seems unpleasant. And some of them are not easy, although green is the easy one. And so it's possible to translate yourself from one pattern to another pattern, where some patterns are more distant from one another. So let me just pause again for any questions, and then I'd like to talk about why this approach might have some effect on the crisis of information quality. So let me pause for a moment, see if there are any questions about the materials that we've already covered. And then I think I'll be wrapping up in about another 10 or 15 minutes with these final comments about why we really want you to become a social media auditor. So let me just pause with that and see if there are any questions, comments, or other topics that you really want covered that we haven't touched on yet. And I'm happy to take requests for those topics.
Hi, okay, this is Leslie. If you have any comments or questions, like, don't hesitate to put up your hand, ask them, unmute yourself, put them in the chat.
I have a question. Sorry, my thing is lagging a little bit. My main question is, will you show us how a little case study of how you download the data and then create the graph or
That's a great idea. Okay, so here we are
that's
in
really useful.
NodeXL, and we were making a manual network, and I wonder how many people on the call right now are Twitter users. Any Twitter users on the call?
Yeah, I'm a user.
Okay. What if you tweeted the hashtag DISC21? Maybe that's more work than you wanted right now, but let me make this a broad suggestion to you all. How about if you would like to appear on the map we're about to make, just tweet DISC21. Or I guess we could type in other things. I mean, Daegu, or I guess there's also Scuba. But and of course, one thing that we could do really quickly is to just come over here and go to Twitter search, and let's make sure that there is DISC21, and there isn't.
Yes, there is.
Well, there.
Mark, DISC 2021. And actually, I just tweeted DISC 2021 with that hashtag. I just tweeted.
All right. I didn't know that. There you go. And then, but that still doesn't get us, not a lot, not a lot. Okay, so there's a few, and then there's a namespace collision with some other conference that is a digital payments conference. But onward and upward, we'll take both, right? And it'll be a good example of what happens when we have a namespace collision. Here, I've got a copy of NodeXL, and I've clicked on the NodeXL menu, and I'm going to the data menu, and I click on import, and I'm going to come down to from Twitter search network. And there's also a list importer, a user list importer, and a tweet ID list importer, but this is going to be the one I use, Twitter search network. And I'm going to paste here disk 2021, and then I'm going to hit OK. And this is going to go to Twitter, go get tweets, chop those tweets into edges, put those edges into the spreadsheet, and then with a click, we're going to run analysis. And so what we've just done is connected to the Twitter API, handed it a query term, got a collection of tweets back, and we're just now waiting for that data to appear in NodeXL, at which point it will also get run through analysis and visualization, and we'll have a very, very basic network because there weren't that many tweets, but we'll have a basic network. And so in many ways, it's about as hard as going into the NodeXL menu, going to data import, clicking import, typing in a query, hit OK, and then that's about it. It then does its thing. It takes 5 or so minutes to process a small data set. It might take 20 or 30 minutes to process a really big data set. And when that happens, what I will do is go get us a already baked data set while that's cooking. Let's see. Oh yeah, here it is. So this is disk. Okay, so this is that data set. We only got a few edges. And why is it that we got so few edges? And the answer to that is Twitter only gives us data for the last 7 or 8 days. And so you may need other methods for data collection other than just going straight to Twitter. If the topic of interest is today's hottest topic or the thing that's happening today, you're in good shape. But if you need something from last year, you will have to find other methods. Now, there are other methods, and we do have a feature. This is the dialog box for a happy list of tweets. I might have gotten them from Pastebin. I might have gotten them from all sorts of web archives. I'll note that Twitter doesn't want people to collect and then distribute collections of tweets, but they do allow the distribution of collections of tweet IDs. And if you brought a collection of tweet IDs and pasted them right there, then you would get the data back. It would go to Twitter and collect that data for you. And so that gives you the ability to get historical data. If you can get it through, let's say, Meltwater or Brandwatch or Talkwalker or Marketing Cloud or something of that sort. And I should note that if you also go to Twitter tweet ID archive, and you just ask Google for that, you're gonna find a lot of places that have already collected tweets. People have collected the Trump tweets. There are ways to collect those tweet IDs, run them through NodeXL, and get an analysis. So what we just saw back here, let's see if I can put this back. Yeah, so it's just finishing up the analysis, but the workflow is essentially just do a data collection, do an import, and then run automate, and it generates a result. And we can see perhaps a better view of this. Let's see. Well, I would point you to Graph Gallery here, where at the bottom of every item in Graph Gallery, we also are providing you with access to the actual data set. So if we look at Graph Gallery and you look at something like smart home, people talking about putting smart appliances in their house. Here at the bottom of that worksheet, of that web page, is a series of links. And one of those links is download the graph data as a NodeXL workbook. And that means that, and almost everything in Graph Gallery you can download and open on your desktop if you have NodeXL. This is for those people who are more Gephi focused, and that's the data as the file format known as GraphML. And GraphML is a popular network data file format used in Gephi and other tools. And that means that you could collect data with NodeXL and write the data to GraphML and then visualize the data in Gephi should you choose to. And the last of these is the option files used to create the data. And that is this thing that's running right now, the thing that is doing automation, the automator of NodeXL that is running this data through a series of operations, even though we are not directly involved in that process. We get to see this button, the automate button, and I'm going to take us back to the slide deck that illustrates this button. There we go. So this is the crux of NodeXL, really. This is the automation dialog box. And this list of operations is performed in order by NodeXL as configured by the recipe. And I'll note that this set of operations can happen only in this order and not in any other order. And that is because in many cases, subsequent steps depend on the steps prior to them. And so this is one of the virtues of NodeXL in that if you're using Gephi, it's really easy to do step 1, step 3, and step 2 and maybe get the wrong result. But in NodeXL, it's impossible. You just can't. And so this set of operations, many of which, like Graphmetrics, have their own set of options, many of which themselves have their own options, and so on. This series of operations closely resembles the syllabus of the class I took in 1992 at UCLA from Phil Bonasich, the father of the Bonasich coefficient, or betweenness centrality. He was the professor teaching network theory at UCLA in the early 90s when I was there. It was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And NodeXL basically has turned that syllabus into software. And we took 9 months to learn matrix algebra and the idea of eigenvectors and eigenvector centrality. We did it all by hand. And I'm sure that was good for me. I'm sure of it. But I wouldn't want to do it again. And it didn't actually help me do the thing. It was like learning about how the chemistry in film works, but not learning how to take pictures. It was like learning how to grind glass into lenses, but not how to frame a picture properly. And so we want to shift the focus just a little bit. We want to make it so that instead you are able to go to a tool like NodeXL and get results rapidly without having to pay that enormous opportunity cost of get the graph, learn Python, store the data, analyze the data, visualize the data, all in code. And so if you do these things, what you're going to get at the end are insights that we think are going to lead to publications. And the hope is that those publications are actually going to play a really important role in the ecosystem. Right now, it is all too easy to introduce statements and claims into social media that are not valid and have those beliefs become popular. And so what we're faced with is the observation that we have built information systems, not high quality information systems. The internet has no opinions about the bits it's giving transport to. It doesn't care. And that may be actually a feature and not a bug, in that humans don't think information has value only because it's true. In fact, most of the information humans value is not true, because we spend a lot of money on fiction. All of it, in fact. How many people know about this thing that happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away? And there are robots and Jedi Knights and lightsabers and spaceships. Has anybody ever heard of any of this stuff? Just looking for a little thumbs up on any name recognition for Star Wars, right? Yeah, okay, good, good, I thank you. How much of that is true? None of it. Like zero. No Darth Vader, no Death Star, no X-Wings, no robots, no droids, none of it, none of it. How much money did you spend consuming that information? How much money did Disney spend consuming the source of that information in order to further monetize it? So Disney spent $4 billion buying Star Wars, and then spent many billions more to build Star Wars properties and rides and that kind of thing. And all of this is just my way of saying the quality of information entirely unrelated to how true the information is. All right, so that leads us to this set of problems. Truth is like beauty. And that's a big problem, because beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And there was a statement made, everyone is entitled to his own opinions, but not his own facts. But that turned out to be an opinion. And there is no way to fact check. If you tell me that COVID is caused by masks, and I say, no, it isn't, and you say, yes, it is, and I say, no, it isn't, and maybe I say, but the CDC says, or Dr. So-and-so says, or this government agency says, and you go, no, it isn't. And we're going to spend hours in social media arguing with each other, but we're not going to convince each other. We're not going to have, as the result of all of that friction and heat, a conclusion that leads to a more true concept. a more true claim. And so, and we can't now hit people over the head with the "because I told you so" stick, because nuclear physicists are no longer fearsome sorcerers who bring on hellfire. Science in general has been mostly sort of debunked. If the scientists said tobacco didn't kill you, now they say it does kill you. If the scientists said sugar is bad, fat is bad, they said that climate change is happening, no, it isn't. Everything's an opinion. So what are we going to do about this? This is a problem. We've lost that sense of consensus reality. And so it could also be the case that the social media platforms are part of the problem, that social media has been weaponized and propaganda and disinformation are meaningful problems. And it's unlikely that we can say to the platforms, solve the problem for all cases, all times. I'm reminded that in the United Kingdom, the Premier Football League boycotted Twitter for 4 days because the abuse that their players receive, racial abuse via Twitter to football players in the UK. So they boycotted Twitter for 4 days, and Twitter in response did nothing. Absolutely nothing, because who cares, right? Your Twitter, you know, the English Football League is on line 1. Would you like to take their call? No. So we need other solutions. This is a problem. There is this thing called tribal epistemology. We tend to believe whatever it is that the groups we're in demand we believe. They believe that Trump got the election stolen. I believe he didn't. They're just beliefs. And so we now have to deal with the fact that beliefs propagate via social media. And it could be the case that social media is still so young that it has negative externalities, and we don't even really know what they are, and we don't know how to fix them. And I'll give you an example. Automobiles became very popular, 1907, 1910, something like that. In what year did the safety belt become a requirement for automobiles sold in the United States? Manufacturer had to include safety belts as the default equipment in the late 60s. So that's 60 years. And in the United States, safety belts were a requirement in the vehicle, but you didn't have to wear them. And they don't work if you don't wear them. They're not like Lucky Charms. And so when did you actually have to start wearing a safety belt by law, at least in the United States? And as far as I can remember, it was the mid 1980s. Okay, so you get a new technology, automobile, in let's say 1910, and you legally mandate safety technologies 77 years later. How many people died in cars? Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people died in cars. And even now we have airbags, we have crash protection, we've got safety belts. In the United States, 38,000 people will die this year anyway. And we're comfortable with that number because, you know, I got to go places. But my metaphor here is just technologies have costs. And we only slowly mitigate them over time. Automobiles were quick by comparison. Think about the history of the steam engine. Comes into fashion in the 1830s, starts blowing up pretty regularly and kills a lot of people. And when do steam engines really become safe, reliably safe? And the answer is never. To our good friends in Japan, what happened in Fukushima? That is a steam engine explosion. I admit a fancy steam engine, a nuclear powered steam engine, but a steam engine nonetheless. And so my point is just that technologies take a long time to develop mitigating technologies to make them safer. And even when they become mature technologies, like a nuclear power plant, they're still not wholly safe. And so what if we need to now identify safety technologies, airbag, safety belt, crash bars, roll cages, and maybe the same has to be designed into social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Reddit, so on. And at the moment, one of the things that I observe is the only thing you can do on these platforms is make information amplified. You can't slow it down. So where's the break? It is said that a rising tide lifts all boats, but some boats rise better than others. This is fake news. This is science. Science has to check its facts and prove that it's right. Fake news makes up whatever it wants to say that day out of whole cloth, and its costs are low. And so we are exploring the idea that social media is an immature young technology and needs to develop whole categories of ancillary technologies. Things that make it so that you can't put diesel in your gasoline tank. Things that make it so that you can't drive at night without the lights coming on. Things that help. And I would categorize these things as detection, deflection, and deterrence. And our hope is that NodeXL is at least a small check in the box for the detection task. The question would be, is your hashtag being manipulated? We don't know. We have no radar or sonar or some kind of detection technology, but maybe we're building that. And so maybe we'll give ourselves a little check here. Yes, I can now tell whether or not something is going on. But category 2 has no checkbox, and that's category 1 has just generated a result. You know you're under attack. Now what? What do you do? What do you do about it? So deflection gets nothing. So if I tell you you're under attack, where is the feature in Facebook or in YouTube or in Twitter that you go and you go, oh, okay, well, for right now, I'll click this button and that will create the shield and I'll be protected. And then later I'll turn it off and I'll go out and I'll try to figure out what's going on. We don't even have deflect. We have no, protect. And then, of course, there is deter. And I put a question mark here because this is ethically dubious. But deterrence is the message that goes, the thing you just did to me, I'm going to do it to you. So maybe you shouldn't do it to me anymore. And that's deterrence. Americans love deterrence. We're really into deterrence. So I'm going to leave that with a question mark because I don't know that it's ethical to come up with offensive technology that causes, let's say, social media chaos and the proliferation of misinformation. But I do believe that detection is a wholly ethical direction for scholars and researchers. So others have studied what makes a social space a safe social space. Jane Jacobs wrote about what was happening to cities when people in the United States thought that cities were going to go out of business. Like New York City was going to be like a giant, horrible nightmare instead of a giant apartment complex for billionaires. Another kind of horrible nightmare. But she argues that you need to avoid the idea of regulation of these spaces, but you also need to avoid abandoning their defense. And so what we're advocating for is a series of technologies, seatbelts and airbags, that could in combination perhaps reduce, mitigate, slow down the rate of low quality information production. And so one approach might be something like this. And maybe if this makes sense, we, the people, can start to say to social media platforms, Thanks for the interest in wanting to operate in my country. We love having you here. That's great. But if you were going to sell your car here, it has to have bumpers and headlights, safety belts, airbags. We have a list. In fact, there's a book. There's a whole shelf of books. These are the rules of the road for selling a car here. And we might say the same of a social media platform. And we might say, look, when users on your platform amplify information, they also have to be able to mitigate that information or diminish or dampen it. And rather than make Twitter the judge and the jury, what if we distribute the task? So I could tell the ACLU and the SPLC, you guys are not just people I follow. We do that now. You're also my editors. And what's an editor? An editor is someone who I trust, and if they make a decision, it affects me. And the decision I let them make is they can delete tweets for me. And so let's go back to the Premier League issue in the UK. They have so much abuse directed at their players that the players no longer want to participate in social media. They appeal to Twitter to help them. Twitter does nothing. And, you know, why would they? First of all, they're in California, Premier League's in England. You know, it's just, there's a lot of people with a lot of complaints. An alternative reality is possible. The Premier League says to its players, to its teams, and to its fans, it says, make me your editor. The fans say, no way. And the fans instead pick the fan association to make them the editor. Doesn't matter to me one way or the other. When they make somebody their editor, before they wake up, all of the racism, all of the abuse has been deleted. And so this allows me to then discover, wait, maybe my editors are making a mistake, in which case I just click the select as editor button again, and they're no longer my editor. People have to earn and maintain the right to filter my view. And I will make the choice as to who should filter my view. And it won't be Twitter, because Twitter doesn't care. And so maybe this kind of an approach is a way of thinking of design requirements. And I'm sure that if we went to Henry Ford and we said about this Model T, great thing, love the car, it's great, what about safety belts? And he'd say, leave me alone, I don't care about safety belts. Yeah, it's hard to nail down a quote. So we need to demand the safety technologies for social media platforms. And part of that is that we need auditors and accountants to root out the equivalent of social media fraud and to make the case for you to follow them as an editor so that they can reduce the visibility of abusive or low quality information. And so a lot of us, I think that the platforms are data banks. They're places we entrust with the most valuable digital assets we have, and we place them on deposit in order to earn interest. But the reality is they're not data banks, they're data casinos, and they don't pay interest, and you don't get to make withdrawals. There is a difference between a bank and a casino. They both handle a lot of money, but they do it in different ways. And so the casino is promising that you might get rich, you might go viral, you might hit the big social media jackpot. But the bank suggests that you will earn interest and then have the right to make a withdrawal on demand. And, you know, if you try to demand your information from Facebook, do you know what they give you? They give you your deposit back, but not the interest. If I went to a bank and put money on deposit and did not get interest when I went to withdraw, I would think I was in a casino. And so we would like to set people's expectations higher. Like, I don't want to bank in a casino. And yet I have put 15 years of my life into Facebook, and I've got no good way to get it out. And I may not be, maybe I made a bad mistake. Maybe that wasn't the best idea. So I'm looking for a data bank. So we are the Social Media Research Foundation. We seek to facilitate your scholarship, and we'd like to make it so that you are able to get the data, visualize the data, analyze the data, and get to an insight. And if there are enough of you doing this work, then you will be the people like the accountants, essentially calling out fraud. And if we can also get the platforms to make those claims actionable, not maybe by everybody, but by enough people, you could develop a reputation as a social media accountant. And when you call out fraud, enough people might listen and follow your lead, maybe block that person or let you block them for them, that over time, we reduce the value of abusive behavior, of the dissemination of disinformation, of low quality information. But it turns out, I think, that these are problems that we must now solve. Otherwise, we are going to be overwhelmed by low quality information, because there are enormous benefits to producing and sharing low quality information. It's cheap. It often generates profit, and it can confuse and divide political opponents. It's unlikely that we're going to create better humans. It's unlikely that the platforms are going to try to help us more. It's unlikely that we're going to find legal remedies either. And so what we may need is a socio-technical solution, a distributed technical solution that allows us to solve problems for ourselves. So with that, I'd love to see if there are any final comments, questions, queries, concerns. I'd be delighted to also schedule time after our event to make sure that software is running for you. We can do a brief one-on-one orientation, make sure that you're able to get to your first data set. I'll also point you to the NodeXL Graph Gallery, where it would be great if you got an account. By getting an account, you get to delete the data sets that you upload. Otherwise, you don't. Other than that, we'd love to see your maps appear in the Graph Gallery. And we think that with your assistance, the landscape of social media can, in fact, be reformed and improved. Maybe not to a utopia, but to a more tolerable and socially productive kind of a state of affairs. So with that, let me just express my appreciation to Manuela and to Leslie, and of course to Park Han-Woo and the DISC conference. It's a real pleasure to get to participate even during a pandemic. And I think back on my many visits to Korea and to the DISC conference fondly. I hope it'll get to happen again in the future. So with that, if you do have comments or questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you so much, Mark, for a wonderful morning, because we really always learn so much from your presentations on NodeXL. Thank you so much, for taking the time. And I always love the metaphors and the analogies. I guess you see me raw without the back. We don't have our background. This is what our command center looks like. Well, just thank you so much. Okay, everybody, and I hope, Mark, I hope you're planning to come to Japan soon after the pandemic finishes and everything. I hope to see you soon in the next year, face to face, but we'll be in touch about NodeXL and other things.
Very good, very good. I'd like to thank each of you. I appreciate it. I wonder, could we maybe blank cameras for 1 second? We'll do a group class photo.
I think that's a wonderful idea.
To Of course, it's entirely optional, but if you'd like to open up the camera for a second, and then I'm gonna go and find my button for screen sharing. Let's see, this, default print screen, right? And very good. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Hello, little ones. That's great. That's great. Okay, and one more print screen. There we go. Very good. Thank you so much for taking the time. I hope you found it useful. And we're available on the web, info, I-N-F-O, at smrfoundation.org, on Twitter at NodeXL and SMR_foundation. We're also in Facebook, YouTube, and we're happy to hear from you. We'd love to help facilitate your next research project with social media and networks.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, it's getting late here. I'm going to go. I hope you all have a nice lunchtime. It's getting towards bedtime here. But thanks very much for the time and the attention, and I'll look forward to hearing from you very soon.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark. Okay, we'll see you. Bye-bye.